of the most pivotal stories in world history, the birth of the United States of America.
How did a group of colonies on the edge of a continent break away from the most powerful empire on Earth?
It's a story of taxes, tea, and a relentless fight for freedom. So grab a snack and let's get into the history of American independence. Our story begins in the 1600s. Over the next century and a half, Great Britain established 13 colonies along the Atlantic coast of North America. These weren't just remote outposts.
They were bustling hubs of activity, developing their own economies and unique identities. But here's the catch. They were still under British rule.
All their laws, their trade, everything was ultimately controlled by a government thousands of miles away in London. For a long time, this system, known as salutary neglect, worked out okay.
Britain was busy with its own problems, so the colonies got a taste of self-governance.
But by the mid-1700s, this was all about to change. Colonists were becoming more prosperous and educated, and they started to wonder why they had no real say in the big decisions affecting their lives.
The major turning point was the French and Indian War, which ended in 1763. It was a long and expensive conflict.
And Britain, despite winning, was left with a mountain of debt. King George III and the British Parliament looked at the colonies and thought, well, the war was fought to protect them, so they should help pay for it. This logic led to a series of taxes that would ignite a firestorm of protest.
First came the Stamp Act of 1765. This wasn't a tax on postage stamps,
but on all printed materials, newspapers, legal documents, even playing cards. Imagine having to pay an extra fee for your daily news or a deck of cards. Colonists were furious. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the principle.
This led to the creation of one of the most famous slogans in history: no taxation without representation. The colonists argued that since they didn't have any elected representatives in the British Parliament, Parliament had no right to tax them. The protests were so effective that Britain repealed the Stamp Act. But they weren't giving up.
In 1767, they introduced the Townshend Acts, placing taxes on imported goods like glass, lead, paper, and most famously, tea.
Once again, colonists organized boycotts.
Women played a huge role here, leading movements to make homemade goods instead of buying British imports. Tensions boiled over in 1770 with the Boston Massacre, where British soldiers fired into a crowd of protesters, killing 5 people. Things were getting serious.
Then came the Tea Act of 1773. Now, this one is a bit tricky.
It actually made tea cheaper for the colonists by giving the British East India Company a monopoly.
But the colonists saw it as a trick to get them to accept Parliament's right to tax them. The response?
The Boston Tea Party. On a cold December night, a group of protesters disguised as Native Americans boarded 3 British ships and dumped over 340 chests of tea into Boston Harbor. That was a lot of tea, and a very expensive act of defiance. Britain's reaction was swift and harsh. They passed a series of laws known as the Coercive Acts, or as the colonists called them, the Intolerable Acts. These acts closed Boston Harbor until the tea was paid for, restricted town meetings, and gave more power to the British-appointed governor. Instead of crushing the colonists, these punitive measures united them. They realized that if Britain could do this to Boston, they could do it to any colony. In response, delegates from 12 of the 13 colonies, Georgia, set this one out
in Philadelphia in 1774 for the First Continental Congress. At this point, most weren't calling for independence. They were still hoping to patch things up with Britain.
They sent a petition to the king, pleading for their rights to be respected, and organized a massive boycott of British goods. but they also began to quietly prepare for the worst.
Militias started training, and weapons were being stockpiled.
The breaking point came on April 19, 1775. British troops marched from Boston to Lexington and hoping to seize colonial weapons and arrest Patriot leaders like Samuel Adams and John Hancock.
They were met by local Minutemen militia who could be ready to fight at a minute's notice.
On Lexington Green, an unknown shot was fired. Famously caché.
The shot heard round the world. The American Revolutionary War had begun. Just a few weeks later, the Second Continental Congress convened.
This time, all 13 colonies were present. The mood had shifted dramatically. Reconciliation seemed impossible.
They took a monumental step and formed the Continental Army, appointing a Virginian delegate named George Washington as its commander-in-chief. The war was on, but they were still technically fighting for their rights as British subjects, not for independence.
The idea of a complete break was radical, but it gained traction thanks to a pamphlet called Common Sense, written by Thomas Paine. It was a bestseller, written in plain language that everyone could understand. Paine argued that it was absurd for a tiny island to rule a vast continent, and that the colonies had a moral duty to declare independence and create a new kind of nation, one based on liberty. Inspired by this powerful idea, the Continental Congress appointed a committee to draft a formal declaration.
The primary author was a 33-year-old Virginian lawyer named Thomas Jefferson.
After some debate and revisions, the Declaration of Independence was officially adopted on July 4th, 1776.
This document was more than just a breakup letter to King George. It laid out a revolutionary philosophy of government that all men are created equal.
That they have inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that governments get their power from the consent of the governed.
With these words, the 13 colonies declared themselves free and independent states. There was no turning back. Of course, declaring independence is one thing. Winning it is another.
The Continental Army faced an uphill battle against the most powerful military in the world.
The early years of the war were tough, with many defeats.
A crucial turning point came in 1777 at the Battle of Saratoga in New York. The American victory there was so significant that it convinced France,
Britain's old rival, to officially enter the war as an American ally.
French money, troops, and most importantly, naval power would be absolutely critical to the American cause.
the brutal winter of 1777 to 1778 at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, tested the Continental Army's resolve.
Soldiers suffered from starvation, disease, and the bitter cold.
But it was also here that the army was forged into a more professional fighting force.
Thanks to the training of a Prussian officer, Baron von Steuben.
They emerged from that winter tougher and more disciplined.
Over the next few years,
The war raged on. From the northern frontiers to the southern colonies, the final major confrontation took place in 1781 at Yorktown, Virginia.
General Washington, with the help of French troops and a French naval blockade that trapped the British fleet, cornered the British army under General Cornwallis.
With no hope of escape or reinforcement, Cornwallis surrendered.
While some fighting continued, Yorktown effectively sealed the American victory. The war officially ended with the signing of the Treaty of Paris in 1_7_8_3 in T Street, Great Britain formally recognized the United States of America as an independent nation,
It also ceded a huge amount of territory to the new country.
setting its western boundary at the Mississippi River. The impossible had been achieved. But the story doesn't end there.
The newly independent states had to figure out how to govern themselves.
Their first attempt, the Articles of Confederation, created a very weak central government.
It was more like a league of friendship than a unified country, and it quickly became clear that it wasn't working. The national government couldn't effectively tax, regulate trade, or maintain a strong army.
So, in 1787, delegates met once again in Philadelphia for the Constitutional Convention.
Their goal was to fix the Articles, but they ended up scrapping them entirely and creating a whole new framework for government.
The United States Constitution.
This document established a stronger federal system with 3 branches:
Executive and judicial, and a system of checks and balances.
After it was ratified in 1788, George Washington was inaugurated as the first president of the United States in 1789. And so, through years of political protests, a brutal revolutionary war, and brilliant diplomacy, the United States came to be. It was a journey fueled by the powerful ideas of representation, self-rule, and individual rights ideas that continue to shape the world today. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through American history. If you found this video interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content just like this. Let me know in the comments what piece of history you'd like me to cover next. Until then, stay curious,